Okay, we talked about the mortgage meltdown, the declining U.S. dollar, the Chinese demand for gold, the escalating war situation, conflict situation in the Middle East. What about gold and global soaring U.S. and global inflation? Well, this is a major deal and one of the major factors in gold's incredible rise. Okay. The answer to all of the world's problems, I say the answer in quotation marks, is the twin war, whether it's the twin wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, America's twin deficits, budget and trade, whether it's a collapsing real estate bubble, the accelerating U.S. recession, the bailout in the subprime mortgage mess, the declining U.S. dollar, keeping the stock market propped up, accidents, and the $681 trillion global derivatives bubble, or in the multi-trillion-dollar hedge fund pyramid, or the next hurricane, tsunami, or natural disaster, the quote-unquote answer to running to all these problems is to run the U.S. government Fed printing presses at Mach 10 speed to inflate like there literally is no tomorrow. And folks, this is not theoretical. It is happening right now. They're creating trillions of dollars out of thin air right now to bail out the financial system. Okay, this just shows where the U.S. dollar has been inflating at a rate of 16%. They've been increasing the money supply at about a 16% rate. Today to prop up, and you can see this, by the way, this is happening with other governments all over the world as well. Today to prop up the U.S. financial system, the U.S. dollar, and to keep a lid on these problems, the Fed is creating $2 to $3 trillion in new dollars of liquidity annually. Folks, if the cracks get bad enough, if the meltdown is big enough, if somebody like J.P. Morgan Chase with its $90 trillion in derivatives exposure begins to melt down, these guys will create $5 or $10 trillion out of thin air. And you say, well, gosh, don't they need to do that to save the system? Well, we'll see, but they will destroy the dollar, and they could hyperinflate the dollar in so doing. Two more major factors in America's high and rising inflation are the fact that Social Security and Medicare are both broke. Now, I suppose everybody here knows that, but they truly are. 80 million baby boomers are coming of age and retiring over the next few years, with both of these systems insolvent. The U.S. workforce is diminishing while the volume of entitlements and retirement benefits payable is exploding. Annual shortfalls will reach $500 billion to $1 trillion, that's annual, over the next decade. Now, political reality dictates that these benefits will be paid. William Proxmire was asked one time, he said, well, someone said to him, well, that there's not enough money to pay for Social Security in the next 10 or 15 years, and he kind of smiled and he said, people will always get their Social Security payments. And then he said, they won't be worth anything, but they will get their payments. They're going to inflate this country into oblivion to keep these systems afloat. But all that simply says is they're going to print money and print money and print money. And in a minute, we're going to go back and we're going to look at how the German hyperinflation got going, okay? Because that's a growing possibility. The government Fed printing presses will run at Mach 10 or 50 or 100 speed, whatever it takes to try to keep the system afloat. And, you know, hey, this is not theoretical. They're doing it as we speak. America is now in a perpetual state of war in the Middle East, in Asia, or wherever the next war appears. The U.S. now has 702 military installations with troops stationed in 136 countries. You ever hear of the Roman Empire? You know what one of the major things that broke down the Roman Empire was, besides the fact that they culturally were in decay and collapsing from within? They were spread militarily so thin all over the world that it basically bankrupted the country. And at the very end, they barely had enough money. In fact, I don't think they had enough money to even bring the troops home. And this is what America's been doing. We've been spreading ourselves very, very thin, while our real enemies are building their militaries and getting ready for a huge conventional or nuclear war in the next 10 to 15 years. Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are all in large military buildups. Our war with radical Islam has gone global. Vice President Cheney says we're in a 50-year war. He might be right. Modern wars are always financed by inflation or government printing presses, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We're now seeing estimates that the Iraq-Afghanistan war over the next few years is going to cost us close to $3 trillion. Okay, what happened in Germany after World War I was they imposed the Treaty of Versailles on Germany, and they imposed, they had the Treaty of Versailles, and they imposed war reparations. You have to pay for all the damage you Germans did. Okay, and so it was a burden the Germans couldn't handle, so they just started running their printing presses. And here's what happened. If you look up in the upper left-hand column, you see in January 19, an ounce of silver. You have to, we'll measure this by looking at an ounce of silver or an ounce of gold. An ounce of silver cost 12 German marks. An ounce of gold cost 170 German marks. By January, go to the bottom of the left-hand column, by January of 1923, which is about 4 years later, an ounce of silver now cost 23,277 German marks, and an ounce of gold now costs 372,000 German marks. Now, the gold and silver weren't going up. You got to understand that. They were maintaining their purchasing power and their value. They weren't going up. The German mark was absolutely falling apart. But you go forward 11 months to the bottom of the right-hand column, and you'll see that by November 30th of 1923, an ounce of silver now costs $543 billion, 1 ounce, and 1 ounce of gold now costs 87 trillion German marks. Clearly, they hyperinflated and destroyed their currency. But you know, it wasn't obvious at first. It wasn't obvious as they kept spending and printing more money and spending and printing more money. It wasn't obvious in Zimbabwe, which now has 100,000% inflation. 100,000% inflation. It takes $52 million Zimbabwean dollars to buy 1 US dollar, and that's today. That's present tense. And I don't think they thought that they were going to hyperinflate their currency, but that's what both countries did. Now, this thing is beginning to rise all over the world. You'll see countries all over the world beginning to run their printing presses faster and faster. In Brazil last year, they increased their money supply 17%. In Canada, 13%. China, 18.5%. In the Euros, 12.3%. Hong Kong, 31.5%. India, 21.5%. The U.S., about 16%, but the MZM money supply around a month ago was actually growing at a rate of about 34.5%. So America is really accelerating. The acceleration of inflation is all over the world. Now, America's perpetual inflation is destroying the U.S. middle class. After the Great Depression, the Fed and the financial political establishment concluded that as long as the Fed can create an unlimited amount of money, there will never be another Great Depression. Well, I wouldn't say there'll not be another Great Depression. What I would say is that if there is another Great Depression, it will be, instead of a deflationary depression, it will be an inflationary depression, where they're running the printing presses faster and faster and faster as the whole system is beginning to implode. And that looks like what we're being launched towards. In the 18 years that Alan Greenspan was the Federal Reserve Chairman, the most irresponsible Federal Reserve Chairman in our history, the dollar lost 50% of its purchasing power as he was creating trillions of dollars, and Alan Greenspan was the father of the dot-com bubble and the real estate bubble, which have now both imploded. Okay? Today, the government Fed report U.S. inflation is 3 to 5%. They lie. Real world inflation in the United States is closer to 15 to 17%. And if you believe inflation is 3%, my gosh, I want to sell you some underwater real estate down in Florida. It's a great deal. You can do really well with it. I mean, they actually tell those numbers to the American people, and the Americans believe it. Oh, that's right. Well, they take out food price increases. They take out energy price increases, medical price. Anything that's going up fast, they simply strip it out. But it was the London Economist that said a month or two ago that our real-world inflation in the United States is about 12 to 15%. You know, base food prices went up 22% in the United States last year, and they didn't count it in the inflation numbers. Perpetual U.S. inflation has forced a whole generation of two-income families, that is, with the wife working. Inflation-adjusted family income is now lower than it was 30 years ago. Okay, what happens with just 6% inflation? Okay, if you take, go to the top of the page, you see 6% inflation, you start out with $10,000, okay? $10,000, after the first year, 6% inflation knocked you down to real purchasing power of $9,400. Go to the bottom of that left column, after 10 years, 6% inflation a year knocked you down to real purchasing power of $5,386, okay? And if you go to the end of the, go to the middle column,